Sean, and she's going to introduce the team and tell you a little bit about what's going on.
Great, welcome.
Thank you. I'm short, so I hope you guys can hear me okay. Good evening, everybody. My name is Ku. I'm the Director for Community Research Services at the Urban Institute. I don't have very much to say other than, this is the kind of research that we love doing. We are thrilled and excited and glad to have had this opportunity to look more deeply into some of the data for the town of Matthews around housing. And I provided some very general, loose reviewing type of oversight, but Rachel Jackson, who is on Zoom, and Katie Zager Providence, who I'm not sure if he's going to join us over Zoom or not, but he's one of our graduate research assistants that was also helping in the project. They are the brains behind everything that you're going to see this evening. So I think I'll just quickly hand it over to Katie. Thank you for having us.
There we go. Good evening, everyone. I'm Katie Zager, and I'll be presenting the Matthews Housing Needs Assessment. Just a very brief background on the UNC Charlotte Urban Institute. We are an applied research and community outreach center at UNC Charlotte. So we're a nonpartisan institute whose mission is to really help communities seek solution to the social, economic, and environmental challenges of our time. Oh, where we go? Are we sorry, this is the right. It's not quite clicking. Yeah, I know you'd think after 2 years would be better Zoom and PowerPoint and putting them together, but something always pops up. All right. So Ku kind of already introduced our project team, but just to reiterate, I'm Katie Zager. I'm a research associate here at the Urban Institute. My colleague Rachel Jackson Gordon is over on Zoom. And of course, our Director of Community Research Services, Ku Zhang. We've also had 2 other people helping out the data collection on this project. That's Dr. Bill McCoy, who is a longtime, I guess, friend of the Urban Institute, who's been consulting with us for many years. And then, of course, our graduate research assistant, Providence Adu. I'll just go over a brief outline of our presentation today. We'll start with an overview of the research, then dive into demographics for the town of Matthews, touch on employment, and then we'll really get into the meat of the presentation, which is our housing inventory, and then how all of this interfaces with this issue of cost burden here in Matthews. And then finally, we'll wrap up with project updates and next steps. Just a little bit of background on this research. Been working on this project for many months now. We have 4 main research questions we're trying to address. Really, the purpose of today's presentation is to address this first research question, which is who needs affordable housing in Matthews, and how well does the current stock of housing options serve this population? What are the gaps and opportunities? So diving into this demographics piece, what our data is telling us is that Matthews is indeed growing. The population has increased by 8% in the past 10 years. However, the pace of growth has slowed down a little bit. Population growth, I guess, again, now is 8%. but it's down from the blistering 23% it was between 2000 and 2010. Looking at households in Matthews, we're seeing an increase in households with older adults. Share of households with older adults has increased from 30 to 40%. And we're also seeing more empty nesters to go along with that. So the households with children has slightly decreased from 35 to 31%. And there's a couple of things that this data could mean. One is the slowdown in population growth could be as a result of a couple different factors, including market saturation in terms of housing. This goes along with the fact that there's fewer homes being built in the past 10 years than there were in the early 2000s. And so really, it's a combination of how much this pace of growth is affected by building and the availability of housing. Matthews is, however, upwardly mobile, but it could leave some households behind. The median household income in Matthews has increased from $70,742 in 2010 up to $89,881 in 2020. Matthews also has above average levels of education. Percent of people with bachelor's degrees in 2010 was 47%, and that's increased up to 53.7% in 2020. Looking at this graph of the distribution of household income, it's really consistent with this pattern where we see household income among younger households aged 22 to 24 skewing slightly above the median, while households 45 to 65 have the highest incomes. But as we kind of get towards the end, we see that a larger share of senior households fall into this low income category of less than $50,000. Almost half, or 45% of people over the age of 65 have incomes less than $50,000. We're still trying to determine what exactly this means in terms of housing, but the lower incomes among seniors might be something worth looking into. And also this issue of housing for seniors and support for seniors has emerged in our interviews. Most Matthews workers live elsewhere. So only 1 in 20 people who work in Matthews also live in Matthews. That's 5% of your workforce is actually able to live in Matthews. The rest of your workforce lives mostly in Charlotte, about 34%. About 16% are commuting from Union County. About 7% live out of state. That's almost exclusively South Carolina. And you have another 2% coming from nearby Mint Hill. And what we can see in the small text here is that housing in these other places is slightly less expensive than it is in Matthews. So these housing values are coming from the American Community Survey, which is self-reported from the past 5 years. But really we can see, people in Matthews are reporting a median value of $283,000, whereas for people living in, Union County or living out of state, housing is significantly cheaper in those areas.
Excuse me, whoever's doing the slides, can you drop it down about 10% so we can see the bottom, the legends?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Oh, all our beautiful footnotes, yes.
Because I can't see the legends down at the bottom. Thank you. Now, this slide may not have it, but the others do. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it might have to do with the way the projector's angled. Okay. Go. All right, is that better? Okay. Okay, yeah. Doing our best. All right, so kind of continuing on looking at workers in Matthews, what we're really seeing is that people who work in Matthews also make less money than people who live in Matthews. So among people who work in Matthews, 24% make less than $15,000 a year, compared to 16% of people who live in Matthews. And then 40% make more than $40,000 a year compared to 58% of the people who live in Matthews. We've also seen over time that the Matthews workforce has grown and the number of jobs has increased. So the number of jobs has increased from about 13,800 in 2002 to 17,632 in 2019. And looking at this jobs data, we took a deeper dive into kind of what the top 5 industries in Matthews are. And these are retail trade, healthcare and social assistance, accommodation and food services, management of companies and enterprises, and construction. And as we can see, the share of jobs in all of these industries have grown, except for management of companies and enterprises. However, we also know that wages for these jobs in these industries tend to be low. The average wage of a retail salesperson in the Charlotte metro is about $30,000. The healthcare industry, of course, can support a wide range of jobs from, food service at the hospital all the way up through doctors or medical administrators. But the average wage for someone working in healthcare support is about $32,000. Food service workers expected to make around $26,000. Management is another industry that has a wide range of people working as part-time tax preparers making around $40,000 a year, all the way up through CEOs, making hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars a year. So we kind of picked the typical salary for this industry. So let's say we have a PR manager living down the street making $130,000 a year. And then finally, the last industry that we took a look at was construction. A construction worker here in Mecklenburg County has an average salary of about $46,000 a year. And then again, keeping in mind, all of these industries are the ones that are growing the most in Matthews, with the exception of that high-paying management industry. Now, taking a look at the housing stock, Matthews mostly consists of homeowners and mostly consists of single-family homes. However, the share of renters has increased in the past 10 years, while the percentage of homeowners has slightly decreased. There's about 13,000 housing units in Matthews. About 74% of these are owner-occupied, compared to 60% in Mecklenburg County. And the housing stock is overwhelmingly single-family housing. At around 62%, this is higher than the share in Mecklenburg County, which is about 55% single family, but significantly less than neighboring Mint Hill, which is about 88% single family. Only about 1/3 of housing units are apartments, while only 5.7% are other types of multifamily. So there's really not very many options here for someone looking to own, say, a condo or a townhouse. Most homes in Matthews are about 20 years old. The mean and median year built was 1991, with most of the homes built between 1980 and 2000. And what we're seeing with this graph is that the housing ages in Matthews are really concentrated. And so you're going to have a lot of housing stock aging out at around the same time. I mean, also houses that are around 20 to 30 years old is really when people start needing to start investing in maintenance quite a bit to keep them inhabitable and in good condition. And so going along with this, as houses age along with your population, some homeowners may need support with preservation, especially these older individuals.
Excuse me for 1 minute. Maureen, can you lower the screen any? I think that would help with Mark's concern. Is it all the way down?
Oh, there we go. Oh. Okay. All right. We also see that home sizes in Matthews have grown larger over time. There were 546 homes built between 2010 and 2019, with an average of over 3,000 square feet and a mean of 2,886 square feet in 2022. I think this graph is really interesting because kind of what we're seeing is a lot of the historic housing that remains in Matthews is on the larger end. And then really between the 1920s all the way up to the 1980s almost, Matthews developed a lot of, workforce or middle income housing, a fairly average size. And then ever since, especially in the 90s and 2000s, that size has increased. If anyone knows who in the 2010s built a mansion that is throwing off our average, I'd really love to meet them. Oh no, we may have lost the same. Yep. Oh, okay, there we go. All right, like, oh no. So this is a map of home sizes here in Matthews. So homes in blue are under 2,800 square feet, while homes in light orange are 2,800 to 4,200 square feet. And those in dark orange are the quite large homes that are over 4,200 square feet. So what we can see here is that larger homes are concentrated in the west part of the town. And also what this map really shows us is, again, that neighborhoods are fairly homogeneous in size and type of housing stock. There's not a whole lot of mixed housing styles or ages in close proximity to each other. Next, we'll start addressing this question of affordability. To assess affordability, we use the income thresholds published by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. These are these are income limits specific to the Charlotte metro area that are used for a number of HUD programs in terms of who qualifies for different programs. So we can see here that for a family of 4, around $25,000 is very low income, and $84,200 is the median income for the area. Housing targeted to families making around $50,000 a year or less are often thought to be low income housing. So when you're talking to developers or out in the community, that's what they might be referring to. While often housing that's targeted to families making 80 to 120% of the area median income is often thought of as workforce housing. However, as we saw with the occupation data, there's people at all income levels that make up the Matthews workforce, including both the low income and workforce housing groups. To assess affordability, we use the 2022 computer-assisted mass appraisal data from Mecklenburg County. These are the most current data that offer a complete inventory of homes in Matthews, but these are preliminary values that are subject to adjustment, especially before the property reval notices go out. And as we'll get to, these values also lag the market considerably. However, again, it's the most complete and up-to-date source we have for housing values in Matthews. And then to assess affordability, we use the rule of thumb that not only us, but a lot of other housing affordability researchers use, which is that households should not be spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So for households making the Matthews median household income of $89,881, only 45% of homes are affordable to them. And using these whole income thresholds, we see that only 1 in 3 homes are considered affordable for families making the median area income. And of course, the definition of median income is that this is 50% of the population. And so we'd really expect to see that 50% of houses or homes would be available to people making this income. So there's quite a gap there. And then we also see that only 16% of homes are affordable to people making less than 80% of the area median income. And for these very low income families, so the $35,000, $50,000 range, are effectively priced out of the housing market completely, even at these values that kind of lag the market. We also did look at recent sales in Matthews using the sales recorded in the County Register of Deeds. We looked at sales between January 2021 and June 2022. And what we see is that there were 839 sales. Market rate sales have an average sale price of $419,397, and median sale prices about $384,500. And kind of the gap between the sale prices that we saw in this assessed values that the county is using is about, on average, the sale prices are about 40% higher than what the assessed values are currently. So when you think about the gap we had before, it's only grown since then. So of these 839 sales, a whopping 3 were affordable to those with low incomes. And only 14% of homes sold in the past 2 years are affordable to those making 120% of the area median income. So again, we think about area median income being 50%, and in this case, more than the population, yet only 14% of homes meet that 30% affordability threshold for those families. So a household in Matthews would need an annual income of around $128,000 to be able to afford the median priced home. So it's about $62 an hour in wages. And so you think about all these, retail workers making minimum wage or slightly more, you have to multiply that, almost by 10 to reach that median, to reach the necessary income. Here we can see that most homes were in fact sold for over $300,000. Blue points represent the homes affordable to households making 120,000% of the area median income. And the yellow and orange points are the ones that would require you to make more than that. So as we can see from the map, home sales have been sparse, but the pattern kind of really follows the size and other attributes that we'd expect to go along with home price. We also took a look at rentals here in Matthews. Rental options also leave families constrained. There's about 4,000 apartments and apartment townhomes in Matthews, concentrated mostly among 13 different apartment communities. When we looked at the rents specifically for these 13 apartment communities, so it's not counting, homes, single family homes or private landlords as much. But the median rent for a 2-bedroom household was $1,646. And the median rent for a 1-bedroom was $1,375. And so, you think about the people needing a 1-bedroom who might be a single income household, but still need to be making a significant income. Indeed, households would have to make over $59,000 a year to afford the median 2-bedroom apartment. If you look at the map, it actually kind of hints at what our next steps are in this project, which is looking at the relationship between housing and transit. So we can see by where these apartment communities are located. Almost all of the apartment communities and multifamily housing on the west side of Independence Boulevard does in fact have access to local bus routes, but we see there's a cluster of multifamily housing west of I-77, whose closest bus route is the Independence Express bus to Uptown, which probably has limited service or utility for people living in those apartments who might want to work in the area. And so there's just kind of this really stark divide in terms of transit routes in Matthews. In all of this, rental housing, owned housing, transportation costs, it all leads to more cost burdened households in Matthews. 40% of renters in Matthews are cost burdened. And as we can see from this graph, cost burden rates are highest for those with very low incomes. And so, 99%, almost 100% of people making less than $35,000 a year are cost burdened. About 43% of those making between $35,000 and $75,000 a year are cost burden. And when you add those two numbers up, again, it's almost 40% of all renters in Matthews.
Can you remind us what that means? What is cost burden?
So cost burden are the households that are spending 30% or more of their housing on, or their 30% or more of their income on housing. And in the report, we'll also look at households that are extremely cost burdened, which are those spending 50% or more of their income on housing. So really to summarize this affordability question up, we know that people making the area median income would have a hard time buying a home in Matthews today. An individual, again, would need to make 100% or more of the area median income to afford a 2-bedroom apartment, ruling out these workers in Matthews' most common industries. The aging or older adults also constitute much of the low-income community in Matthews, making home preservation perhaps instrumental to allowing these people to stay in the community and age in place. Overall, groups making less than 120% of the area median income, again, seniors in the workforce, would have a hard time purchasing a home. Renting is more feasible for this group, but as this group is growing, there might not be enough rental homes to match this growth. And again, this is a question we're going to explore more in the final report, this mismatch and trajectory of rental and owned housing. Next, we'll talk about the qualitative research that we've been doing. And by we, I mean my colleague, Rachel Jackson-Gordon, who's on this call, has been doing a great job reaching out to community members. She's completed over 12 interviews and has 4 more scheduled. She's constantly trying to reach out to people and schedule more interviews. And so there's even more outreach being done. We have faced some challenges in accessing groups of residents or the kind of typical Matthews resident. We've done a great job, reaching out to developers, the town employees, employers here in town, but hopefully we can find some residents to talk to. And Rachel will be happy to elaborate on this if you have any questions. But really kind of some of the themes that have emerged in this qualitative research so far have been the developers talking about the cost of land and availability of land. They've talked about the need for flexibility on aesthetics or density to make the numbers work in order for them to develop housing, and especially affordable housing. Everyone we've talked to has an increased desire and agrees that affordable housing is an important issue. And talking to some of the people who live or have worked in Matthews for a long time, they really sense the shift of Matthews moving from a more affordable, family-friendly town to a more, exclusive enclave or bedroom community for the city of Charlotte. And then finally, this question of the aging population and their desire to stay in Matthews and the need to age in place and what supports that population might need. Next, we'll talk about some initial recommendations. These recommendations have primarily come from the qualitative research that we've done. This is something we'll dive much more into depth on our final report. So there's a desire to develop an affordable housing plan as a key initiative for Matthews. This would include determining what concrete actions the town can take. And so an example of one of these actions might be considering deed restrictions to control resale prices or to keep a cost of land down. So for instance, agencies in Charlotte have had success with land trusts and similar tools to lower the cost of land for housing, which makes development, of course, much more affordable. They've also talked about considering flexibility or compromise when zoning to reduce the cost of build. So a lot of these limitations and design requirements needed to comply with Matthews ordinances are showing up as barriers for developers in some of our interviews. Another option would be considering expedited permit processes and reduced fees for affordable housing developers. Next would be taking advantage of existing federal programs that Matthews is eligible for. We went to the HUD Housing and Urban Development databases to see what federal programs Matthews is participating in. And I was really surprised to see that there were not any HUD supported developments here in Matthews compared to towns like Cornelius and Huntersville do have a few developments that were developed using things like the low income housing tax credit or the housing trust fund. Matthews does face some barriers there in that a lot of these programs are geared towards very low income populations, and Matthews is such of a size and distribution that a lot of times in the data, for instance, like a census tract, if you have a low income area and a high income area right next to each other, they sort of even each other out, and the data doesn't show the fact that there is a low income area there that might need some attention. And so Matthews does have some of its kind of demographics and numbers working against it, and it makes it harder to qualify for the highest level of HUD subsidies. But there are subsidies available for towns like Matthews. There's also potential to partner with Mecklenburg County. So Rachel has specifically talked to or mentioned LaShonda McCorkle Hart as a person who's been working in developing relationships with towns, such as Smithville and Cornelius and the revitalization plan they recently passed. We also heard a lot about the need for education and buy-in from the local communities. So getting buy-in and collaboration with local companies in neighboring areas might be an opportunity. We believe that companies have a vested interest in making sure that their employees are able to get to work and can live near their jobs. And so that might be an area of support. There's also a need to educate various stakeholders engaged in these conversations, specifically to address a few key issues. One is, of course, NIMBYism. I'm sure as town board members, you're very familiar with the not in my backyard commentators. It sounds like they love to make an appearance at your meetings every now and then. Another one would be source of income discrimination. So in addition to not using HUD development programs like tax credits, we also saw that Matthews has little or no use of Section 8 housing vouchers, where HUD will support the difference between the market rent and what these families can afford. When we looked at the data, it was all suppressed because there was either no or not enough housing voucher use in Matthews to collect the data. And then finally, negative stereotypes of individuals needing affordable housing. As we've shown, a lot of these are the people who do live in Matthews and work in Matthews. And essentially, they're the neighbors of the people who live here. And then finally, we can work with local organizations or entities such as the Matthews Housing Alliance to implement some of these educational efforts. And we also heard that there's a need for leaders, so popular opinion leaders or faith leaders, business leaders, people in the community to really help educate their constituents as well. And so that's where we're at so far. I just want to say thank you, and we'll open it up to questions and comments.
All right, thank you. We have any questions? Commissioner Tofano.
I just have a comment. This was an awesome presentation.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank you.
a lot of hard work in here. Was the data source, I know a lot came from Mecklenburg County, but was a lot of it from the census as well?
All the demographic data came from the American Community Survey, which is a census product. It averages data over the past 5 years. But yeah, we used the 2020 American Community Survey data, and almost all the housing data was from the Mecklenburg County tax parcels, the Register of Deeds. And then the American Community Survey does collect data on housing and rents. But I think talking to Nadine and Jay, we felt that in the housing environment that we're in now, data from 2020 is almost so obsolete that the utility is pretty limited. And so we really concentrated on both these assessed values, even with their limitations, and then the sales data to try and get the most.
And one other thing,
picture.
you gave a lot of wonderful recommendations. When you're talking among yourselves, what do you think is the probability that these recommendations would actually have an effect, considering the trajectory that the town is on?
I mean, if I knew, I'd be a consultant for every single town in America.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, the probability of being able to solve the affordable housing issue with a single policy, of course, it's going to be a very, very tall order. And, we've been trying for the past 50 years as a country and haven't done it. But I think, being able to commit to even one policy or one program will really show that Matthews has a commitment to affordable housing. And I think what this really comes down to is, partly Matthews' identity of who do you want to live in Matthews. And I think that's what this data shows is who can afford to live here and what Matthews might end up looking like in the future based on this data if nothing is done. So
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem McCool.
If we can go back a couple of slides to the recommendations. So it says work together to start a fund for dedicated affordable housing. How much does that need to be? I guess that's a question I've had is, what is that number? I don't know if you have that or an idea of what that would look like.
In terms of working with,
Like it says to have a fund dedicated for affordable housing. We've set aside $1.5 million of ARPA funds, and we've talked about, is that enough? Is it too much? Is that not nearly enough? Like, I guess it's hard to put a quantitative number on it. And so I'm kind of curious if you guys have found anything, what that should look like.
we haven't looked into specific policies and specific dollar amounts per se. I think we spent a lot of time looking at is kind of what the relationship is, or what is needed to say get a development done, the relationships that the town has to have with developers, which has to have with affordable housing agencies, and then HUD overseeing all of it. And so, there's a lot of money flowing through those deals, but I think there's a lot the town can do to perhaps facilitate that type. And I'm not sure where exactly in that process, say $1.5 million would go, but that would really, I think, be a question for the developers and people here in the community.
So I would just quickly add that I think that's one of our next steps as far as what we're going to be looking into as well.
And what have you, and it's different. So I'd be real curious how that works out, and then how does that parlay into low income side of things? The other piece I heard you say is that it seems like the workforce housing is the chunk that sort of pay a lot of attention to because it's more graspable, I guess, in terms of where we're up here, low income's way down here, but workforce is in between, and we have a better shot at it. And you made a comment that 1 in 3 homes are affordable in the sort of workforce sense. But if we could get the 1.5 homes in 3, that'd be your 50% in the workforce housing arena. So it seems like a reasonable, not approach, or a reasonable gap to shoot for. And I could see, you mentioned several things here that have been sort of taboo conversations, and the taboo conversations, and you made it sometimes, is the words of density and things of that nature, because without reduction in square footages to the place to make it work. So I guess I really don't have a question in all this. It was more like, I'd like to see how that aging community of low income transitions Is that, if we go chasing it, we go, well, why are we chasing it? Because the group behind them are much wealthier than their grandparents were. So why are we doing that? And should we not be looking at the workforce housing more intrinsically? And what are their lifestyles as to whether or not are they more townhome savvy, more apartment dwellers, more renters than purchasers because they want to be mobile as well.
Mhm. Yeah, certainly. And one thing we didn't really touch on this presentation, except, very little, is that when you have people, commuting into Matthews, they're the ones absorbing that transportation costs. And then there's costs, imposed to the towns in terms of, congestion on the roads and things like that. So again, that's something we'll explore in our next report or in our final report. And then, I'm really curious to try and dig in a little bit more about what the relationships are between housing costs and age and income. I think there's more nuance we could find there.
When you looked at the demographics, did you turn up the average age of a citizen in Matthews? I was asked that the other day. I didn't know what it was.
We did look at the average age. I want to say it's like 37.
Oh, wow. I thought it would have been older.
But don't quote me on that.
Okay.
I can
Interesting.
certainly find it and send it to you.
Yeah, I would have, just because we have so many elder communities here, I thought it would have been a little older. Commissioner Garner.
Thank you for the presentation. Some of these things I know this is really high level so far, and I'm curious about when you pointed out income discrimination. When do you come back? Will you have more of an in-depth dive into things like that? Or is that, I guess I'm wondering about the scope of the information you're going to bring back.
Yeah, we can certainly describe what the problem is with income discrimination. I'm not, sure to what extent it's an issue in Matthews, other than that there's very little use of Section 8 housing vouchers here. And so again, those types of recommendations we'll go into the final report. And we'll also certainly elaborate on what exactly some of these programs are and what some of the issues might be.
Well, I bring that up because we've heard developers say that they won't accept vouchers because of the paperwork that's involved, or X number of reasons. And it's not just Section 8 vouchers, but it might be any number of income that's not a standard paycheck. So I'm curious about that. And if it's not addressed in this, it's something I think we should discuss as a board. And also, I'm curious if you'll examine corporate rental ownership in Matthews and the trends that seem to be taking on in certain areas of town.
Yeah, we have gotten the data set from the planning department for that. So we can certainly put that in the final report.
And one third question that I just realized, will you look at the Airbnbs that are taking housing off the market and being put into tourism or short-term rental?
If it comes up in our qualitative research, we'll certainly include it. I can't guarantee it will come up unless an Airbnb expert for us to talk to. As more the quantitative person on the team, as soon as someone brings something up, my first question is, okay, where do we get the data? And for instance, we can certainly look at corporate ownership because that's all in the tax parcel database. But I'm not quite sure about like Airbnb or hospitality,
right?
And single family homes specifically, but
we all received an email about Airbnbs. And so I looked into it and noticed that at least 2 of the homes sold in the past 6 months were flipped and turned into Airbnbs. So I would imagine that's going to be a growing trend, at least until some sort of regulation controls it. But both of those homes have been moderately priced homes. And I think that's going to be something we have to come to terms with here in Matthews too.
Yeah, there's just so much money in the Airbnb plan. I think it will be, I think the legislature will address it at some point because it is going to be a problem. Commissioner Whitley.
Thank you so much for your presentation. For so many times I've said this to the citizens, Matthews is a rich town, and you proved that tonight in your presentation. But at some point, it hurts me as a commissioner for 7 years that we have not addressed our lower income neighborhoods to bring them up or give them a nice place to live or offer affordability. There is federal funds available. And I don't know why we haven't tapped in on some of that to help do that. I know that we have done some things through Habitat for Humanity, and they have capitalized on quite a bit. But I think we have an opportunity, and piggyback on Mayor Pro Tem Cool's question about the money set aside. I'll be curious, and if you could check and see the other towns, the ARCA money that they receive, how much money do those towns set aside for affordable home? That's something I have been asking that this town start setting aside each year in our budget monies for affordable homes. So not just because until we had ARCA, we never had any money at all set aside. And I think that's doing the town an injustice when we don't take care of those people who are less fortunate than the 380,000 up in the town. Mm-hmm. I looked at the map, and when you're showing, it's pitiful that we don't have any projects that is affordable. I'm not real big on HUD. I've had a HUD house before that I leased a long time ago, and I didn't have no serious problems with it. And the young lady and her son took care of it real nice. But yeah, I think that we as a board have to determine, do we care about those citizens that make less than $89,000 a year, and try to make them, feel that they're welcome? Because it's sad when you show how many people that work in Matthews that don't live there. And we all know that. I mean, every time we got a developer come here, nobody can afford it. The police can't afford it. The hospital can't afford it. Public Works can't afford it. They all work out of town. I see them go every day in Union County. They live over there and come back here. And I think we're doing ourselves just, but it's a good presentation. And I thank you for all of that. But if you can check and see how much the other towns allotted with the ARCA money that they had to affordable homes, I think that'll answer Commissioner Mayor Pro Tem Cool and myself answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, another point I think would be an interesting data set to have is, and I don't know if you can get this, but how many people here work multiple jobs to be able to afford whatever housing they have, because I think that's a big piece of for the education purpose. Again, talking about fighting stereotypes. Well, these folks are lazy. I know people that work 3 and 4 jobs just to make their rent and buy food and things like that. So that would be I don't know if you can, how you might get that data, but that would be interesting to have. Commissioner Tafano?
I'm sure that it was embedded in the presentation somewhere, but I just wanted to ask. I know that you had the statistics about how many people work in Matthews, live in Matthews, but how about the flip of that? Is how many people live in Matthews actually work in Matthews?
We do have those statistics.
Yeah, that's the one I'm really interested in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that will definitely be in the final report as well. I think we were trying to keep our presentation to a reasonable length.
Yeah.
But I think I remember most people who live in Matthews work in Charlotte.
Yes.
So.
Could you supply that information, please? Okay, thank you. No, actually, it was the other way. It was, unless I missed it. Did I miss it?
Yeah, well, we included people who work in Matthews, but yeah, we do have data on people who live in Matthews and be able to see where they work. But it wasn't in this presentation, but I know it's in a data set we've shared with the planning department, so we can pass that along.
I mean, all these concerns feed into other concerns like traffic. If people have to drive to go to work to Charlotte.
Exactly. That's the reason I was asking. So it is included in here?
Not in this presentation.
That's what I thought.
But we can.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
All right. Are there any other questions or comments? We appreciate the presentation. Can we get a copy of this?
Sure. And I also do have a 1-page kind of executive summary or fact sheet that I can hand out right now. That has a good chunk of this data on it.
All right, that would be great. There are no more questions. We appreciate your time tonight. Look forward to your final report.
Thanks. Rachel, is there anything you wanted to add real quick?
Hi, thank you. Yes, Katie, you did a wonderful job presenting all of the data that you've been painstakingly pulling together. I really welcome all of the questions and comments from all of the commissioners, and I'm looking forward to speaking with several of you later in September. I am trying to find some of these questions, and some of these questions are ones that I've had myself, and I'm trying to find the right people to answer those, but I do feel that some of them will be a bit elusive to answer. So I want to welcome any emails of questions, specific questions that I could potentially pry into as I'm doing interviews with folks. Please feel free to reach out. I'm sure you can find my email pretty easily through the planning department, or I can also, I guess it probably wouldn't be helpful to send it in the chat here, but thank you so much for your time. It really has emerged as an issue that everyone I've spoken with, where people are acknowledging that affordable housing is an issue. And it's not just Matthews, it's the entire nation, right? And I think that this is a tremendous opportunity for Matthews to make some really great strides for the people in the community. So thank you.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, if there's nothing else, we'll recess till our 7 o'clock meeting.